Good evening and welcome to Monk Chat here at Empty Cloud Monastery. This is our regular Friday evening program answering questions that you might have about Buddhism, about meditation practice, or about monastic life. So anything related to Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, we can try and answer those to the best of our ability here. And so if you have any questions related to those topics, feel free to leave those in the live video chat bar there. And if people have questions here in person, they're welcome to ask, though we do prioritize the online questions just because we have question period here at the monastery live. And I see some friends joining in tonight already, lots of friends, and leave some questions from Richard and Julie, Rick, Kowser friends, Bhavani, Ryan, Robert, Lydia, Mariah, Sean, Hasanta, Mary, Manal, Bhumika, Jody, Kumu, so lots of friends joining in. So anyone else also watching this live or later on, hope that you're doing well. Manny as well. Okay, so at this time I will render homage to the Buddha and then we'll get to your questions and try to address those. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang saranang gacchami. Okay, so let's see. We have greetings from Bolivia. Richard, greetings. And Richard has the first question for the night. Richard says, a smart guy, a rich guy, and a healthy guy have the happiness and suffering of a smart, rich, and healthy guys. But he says a dumb one, a poor one, and a sick one also have the happiness and suffering of a dumb, poor, and sick one. So can happiness be really measured? Can really one be happier than the other? Right, so Richard is asking about, every person has their own happiness and their own suffering, right? So happy person has happy suffering and poor person has poor suffering, right? So maybe we have a phrase for this, the grass is always greener, right? So when you are rich, then you usually don't wish to be poor, but you start to notice maybe all the other rich people, how they're happier, they have nice things. So then you start to be jealous and want to catch up, right? And poor people, they tend to think, that they want to be rich, right? You think, all their problems are related to when they're poor, but actually then they become rich and then they have different problems. And lay people, sometimes they think, I want to go to the monastery and become, maybe they want to become a monk so that they can get rid of their lay problems. But then actually they become a monk and they realize that also there's monk suffering. And then maybe some monks, sometimes they think that they want to become lay people again. Maybe they think that it's difficult becoming a monk. It's difficult. And so they think they want to be a lay person. But then they think, they realize if they do become a lay person, they'll realize, there's a lot of suffering being a lay person. So it's always greener. And in Italian, there's actually a phrase, stavamo meglio quando stavamo peggio. Eravamo meglio quando eravamo peggio. And that means we were better off when we were worse off. So that means, usually it's said because when people were poorer, life was simpler. So now people are rich and they are, people are addicted to smartphones and they're anxious and there's too much and people are picky and restless and less resistant to difficulty. And people are more uncertain. They have less mental clarity. They have less peace. And sometimes in difficult, when people were poorer, when they were worse off, actually it was easier. Simple mind and simple life, and things were okay, and you focus on the inside. But when you have a lot of external conditions, sometimes you get distracted. So yeah, happiness and suffering, they are relative, right? It is true that poor people will suffer and rich people will also suffer, and they're different. So it's not that poor people don't suffer, but I don't want to give that image. So there is a lot of suffering. But yes, so you say can happiness be really measured? Can one really be happier than the other? I think that what we have to look at, is of course our hearts. That's where we can find happiness, right? Is the heart. So you can have a rich person who is very happy, right? Maybe some rich people, they might practice lots of generosity. They might use their wealth to benefit others and benefit their family. And they might be comfortable. And they also might practice morality and virtue. They might do business, which is good and wholesome. And they also might use their free time. Rich people have more free time to practice meditation if they're not very busy with business. So if you have free time, then you can practice meditation. So you can practice dana, generosity, sila, virtue, and bhavana, meditation, right? Cultivating the heart. And so there's a lot of happiness that can come from someone who's wealthy. But also someone who is poor can have a lot of happiness, right? They can practice a lot of contentment, right? Rich people, like I said, it's very easy to be distracted by the outside, jealous, greedy, angry at other people. I remember seeing a kind of a graph, and it was measuring the amount of income that someone had, so how much money they made, and then how much money they wanted to make, how much more money they would like to have. And I think this was done maybe in America. I can't remember exactly where. And so they found that people who they made very little money, they wanted to make more, right? So they had a sense of discontent, and it went up like that. So you make a little bit more, and they wanted a little bit more money. So, but then they got to about the middle class, like American middle class, and it was like they were pretty much okay. They wanted a little bit, but it was like pretty much they were okay with where they were at. And then as the money went higher than that, it was like the poor people again. They wanted more. So like the wealthier they got, the more they also wanted more money, if I remember correctly. So, it was really like kind of in the just enough was sort of like that was good. And then above and below that, they were unhappy because, you get $1 million and then you want more than that. And if you have too little money, then you want more than that. So poor people can practice contentment. They can practice patience, endurance. They can practice virtue, and they can practice generosity. And actually, when someone who is poor or wealthy, what matters is letting go, right? When we're talking about generosity. So if a wealthy person gives a nickel, then it's not very much merit. It's not very much goodness because they don't have to actually let go of it really much at all. If a poor person gives a nickel, then it actually could be a lot. If someone is very, very, very poor, like a homeless person, maybe a nickel they might make 1 nickel per hour. If it's a slow day, a bad day, maybe not many people around, they might only make a nickel in an hour. So if they gave that nickel to someone else, that would be a really big deal, right? So it actually doesn't matter how much we give. What matters is when we have the intention of really giving with our heart, like we let go of something, and so we relinquish it, and also we want to benefit someone else. So that's what really matters. So you can measure happiness, in terms of virtue, in terms of those inner qualities. That's a more reliable way to find happiness because outside it's true, it's very relative. Often. Okay, and then a follow-up on this. Suffering and happiness permeates all existence. Or in other words, everything has its gratification and danger, as the Buddha said. But what about its escape? Richard asks, is the escape perhaps the happiness that one gets from the difference between the gratification minus the danger of a particular state? But if yes, that would mean that being rich is better than poor. Okay, so you have a thinking emoji. So let's see if I understand this. You're asking, would the escape be the happiness they get with the gratification minus the danger? Yeah, so I don't think, if I understand what you're saying, Richard, then that would not be the escape, no. The escape is, so for those who don't know, briefly, Richard is referring to the Buddha gave a teaching, and he said that when any kind of state, any kind of condition, you can evaluate. You can evaluate the gratification. It's called the asada. That's like the good part. So like when you bite into an apple, right, there's a juicy good part. That's like the asada. And then he said you can also contemplate the adinava. That's the drawback, the danger. So that's like the bad part. So you bite into an apple and it's very juicy, very sweet. But then you notice that actually there's a rotten part of the apple and you're disappointed. And after you eat the apple, it's all gone. You don't have any more. So it wasn't reliable. It wasn't lasting. And also the apple is very hard to get. You have to do a lot of work in order to get it sometimes, right? So they're not always accessible. They don't last very long, and they can also have defects. And so the happiness is very conditional, very temporary, very unreliable. So that's the drawback. That's the danger, right? So we do enjoy apples. Apples have good things to them, but they also have bad things. They also have drawbacks, like dangers, where if you were to rely on that, it actually wouldn't give you much happiness. And then the Buddha says, then you can see, okay, so there's a kind of dichotomy here. Like I go chasing after all these pleasures, chasing after nice things and comfortable things and pleasant situations and people and friends. But there's a drawback because they're temporary, fleeting, unreliable. They change. It causes discomfort sometimes. So what's the escape? Like, how can you escape that dichotomy of chasing after the good part, but always ending up with the bad part too? And the escape is letting go of desire for that thing. So if you let go of desire, if you let go of attachment, if you practice contentment and relinquishment, then whether you have the apple or not, you're okay. So for example, in the example of the poor and the rich person, the escape would be seeing, oh, wow, for example, money, right? It's possible to accumulate lots of money and become very rich, but it's also possible to lose lots of money and become very poor. And money is very, sticky, very difficult. It's very engaging. It requires a lot of work and activity, a lot of engagement to save it, to spend it, to use it, to get it, to protect it. So money is, it has this spectrum. You can become very rich, and you can get nice things, but you can also become very poor, and there's a lot of work involved. And so the escape would be letting go of desire for the money, just kind of stepping out of the rat race. So then whether you have money or not, you escape that situation. Like it doesn't matter. You're out of there. So it doesn't mean that you don't engage in money at all. Though, as monastics, for example, we have a precept not to use money, not to use money basically for anything. So, in the case of money and so on, yes, there is a Buddhist principle of poverty, but the escape from money in a lay context would be that you would want to remove desire for it, remove concern for it to the best of your ability. And that's the same with anything. So the escape is removing the desire, removing the involvement in that thing. So the gratification doesn't pull you in and get you stuck, and the drawback doesn't drag you down and make you suffer. And Rick says, Bhante, can you talk about ways to cultivate and strengthen faith? So faith in Buddhism, there are two words that are in Pali. One is saddha and one is pasada. And of course, faith has slightly, in some religions like maybe Christianity, Islam, and so on, faith is a little bit different from Buddhism. Not totally different, but it's different because in Buddhism, what we're using faith for, which is related to cultivating and strengthening it, is that we want to develop a kind of trust in the practice, right? A trust in our teachers and our practice so that we put forth energy. So faith, the result of having faith is that you apply yourself. So for example, if a doctor gives you a bottle of medicine and you don't trust the doctor, you don't trust the medicine, then you will not take it. If you trust it a little bit, you might try it a little bit. Maybe you'll think like, oh, I'll take one of them, not two. If you have a lot of faith in it, you'll be very careful. Like you'll take it every day and you'll make sure the schedule's on time and you'll be very careful and you'll go to the doctor and check in. If you have a lot of trust in the doctor and the medicine, you'll be very ardent, very mindful about taking the medicine. So the Buddha, if we have faith that the Buddha was teaching something which is helpful, practical, that the Buddha was himself enlightened and that he had attained freedom and that he was teaching how to do that to others, if you trust in that, then you'll put forth energy to practice for that. So whenever we are feeling lazy, we can look, why am I feeling lazy? And very likely it's a lack of faith. It's some kind of, the faith faculty is lacking at that time. So, for someone. So, for example, if we really, really, truly believe that the house is on fire, like if someone tells you your house is on fire, if you believe them, you're going to want to get out of there, right? You're not going to want to stay. But if you're kind of a little bit doubtful, you might be a little bit lazy about going out of the house. And if you don't believe them at all, you won't leave. You just won't trust it. And so you have to trust, if we're lazy, the Buddha is saying it's very serious. He's saying we could die at any moment. We're caught in a cycle of suffering, which is without discoverable beginning. There are many realms. Some of them are very painful. And once being a human is very precious, very rare. You can understand the words. You can practice meditation. You can cultivate your heart. You have intelligence and mindfulness. So this is very rare, very precious, and very short-lived, very dangerous. So it's really important to practice. So if you trust that, you will practice. You will, and you'll try to understand, and you'll try to meditate, and you'll be virtuous. You won't be, you won't lack virtue, because you'll know that you need to really try to do good things and cultivate goodness in your heart. And so you can look, like, if you want to strengthen and cultivate faith, you just look like, how is my energy going? And if it's not going very well, then you look at the faith, you look at the root, and you try to find ways that you can relate to it. So some people, they can't relate very much to the Buddha. It's very abstract. But if you do relate to the story of the Buddha, you can study his story. Learn about his story, learn about him as a person. As a human, right? The Buddha was, a human, a real person, who walked the earth and so on. So you can learn about that, and that can inspire you. Like, wow, there really was a person who did that, right? It's kind of like when you want to play an instrument, and then you hear about and see and read about famous musicians who are very, very skilled because they put a lot of practice in. And then you think, oh yeah, I really want to practice so I can become like that. So if the Buddha was a very, very skilled cultivator, he was very skilled at cultivating his mind, training his mind. And so if you read his story and learn about his story, contemplate it, meditate on it, and look at Buddha statues and so on to contemplate those qualities that he developed, that can inspire faith. Other times it might be studying. It might be learning the teachings and studying them. So some people, when they encounter teachings on impermanence and teachings on dependent origination, or teachings on virtue and meditation, then they find it like they grow a lot of faith, because they're like, wow, that's very, it's teaching me so much about myself. Like we tend to think that we're so smart and we know everything, right? But actually then you can learn a lot about yourself from, very ancient things. And then you start to get a lot of faith, like, wow, I really have a lot to learn here. They know better than me. So then you can get a lot of faith, like, wow, that's very inspiring to put forth energy and learn more about that. For you personally, Rick, I'm not entirely sure how to advise. But I do recommend definitely just contemplating the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and then lastly the Sangha. The Sangha being, if you don't necessarily connect very much to the Buddha or the Dhamma at this time, you can also connect to the Sangha. And I know some people like that. So you can recollect and learn about famous practitioners, right? Famous monks, famous even lay practitioners who were very diligent, very attained, very powerful. Then that can give you a lot of faith, because then you can think, oh, they did it, so you can also do it, right? So recollecting Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and finding ways that work for you to cultivate that sense of faith. And you can kind of pair it with that sense of urgency. When you have urgency, then you tend to look for a solution. So if you have a sense of urgency, then you'll tend to be more open to the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, right? If you're like having a good time and partying, and then you're not really so concerned about it, then you're not going to be very faithful, because you don't think that you need much faith, right? So we already have faith in something. Everyone has faith in something. So you might have faith that you can find happiness through your job. You might have faith that you can find happiness through having nice friends. Well, that faith, how is it working out for you, right? Is it working? Right? So for example, modern society, and especially the West, but now it's not even especially the West, it's just the entire globe, there is a strong, strong faith that material accumulation and economic growth and consumerism and so on, technological advancements, that this will bring us to a state of happiness. Where is this faith coming from? Look at the state of the planet. Look at the state of mental health. It's horrible. It's worse than it's probably ever been in recent years, in the last maybe thousands of years. So where is this blind faith that materialism, consumerism, capitalism, where is that coming from? It's just simply ignorance, right? So people sometimes they think like, oh, they don't have faith in religions, but they do. They do have faith in religions. It's what they've been told when they were a child. It's what they've seen with their parents and their friends. It's what their celebrities and influencers told them. So they believe, they're blind faith followers of that system. So we just check that. If we have faith in something else, then we look and say, how is this working out for me? I have faith in this, but it doesn't seem to be going so well. So maybe I should look for something else. And that can also help strengthen your faith in practicing, in developing yourself. Because then you think, wow, this is actually something that's much more valuable, much more rewarding. So yeah, those are a few thoughts. Okay, and Bhavani says, some monks leave their bodies according to their will. Can the suicide be the same? I'm not sure if I understand your question, but it sounds like you're asking, would that be suicide? And I guess I would say that I would never recommend that anyone do anything like that. So we want to cherish our life. We want to protect our life no matter what, because you can always, sometimes we don't understand how much we can grow, and we don't understand how much potential there is in a life, especially a human life, but all life, there's a lot of potential there. And so I would just say that I wouldn't look to those as examples. Don't emulate that, and just, set it aside. I would say we don't know what they were. We don't need to focus on what others do and don't do. We can just focus on what do we do and don't do. And, we should protect and cherish our lives and so on. So that's what I would say to this. It's just, we don't need to worry about judging. We just focus on cherishing within our own heart life to the best of our ability, following the precepts and protecting our life. Okay, Robert, hello Robert, you're doing well, says, is there any way that AI can be used in Dhamma practice, or can you foresee any future possible uses? Yeah, I personally don't think that AI should be used really at all. AI in the sense of like what's now becoming popular, right? Of course, we have things like search engines, and there's a lot of technology which is quote unquote intelligent, right? Which is, for example, StreamYard and so on. This is already doing a lot of things, but AI in the sense of like AI which imitates a human, which imitates humans and interacts as if it were a human and provides answers as if it were a human. I personally am very skeptical that should be used at all. There's a lot of problems with that. So I think that we should really assess, what do we want to be filling our mind with? Do you want to fill your mind with the imitations of the creation of people in Silicon Valley from a machine which conglomerates information without really much sense of purpose except for engaging and getting customers, or do you want to engage your mind in reading Dhamma and practicing meditation and learning about, from being around skilled people with virtue? So the Buddha was very, very emphatic that we should associate with wise people, good friends, and we should not associate with fools. So when people start associating nowadays with AI, talking all the time to ChatGPT, whatever it is, we should just ask, is that associating with wise people? AI does not have virtue. AI is not built on virtue. It's built on non-virtue. It's built on greed. It's built on delusion. AI does not have wisdom. AI does not have generosity. So it's not a good friend. It's not a friend at all. It's a fake, it's a product to make people kind of addicted to consuming information from these corporations and so on. So I'm very, very skeptical that should be used at all, let alone in Dhamma practice. So yeah, do I foresee possible future uses? I do foresee it because I've already seen. I know in some countries they're going to start teaching Buddhism even to monks and so on with AI, which I think is just an awful idea. So I do know that they're going to be, I've seen, at least I know that I've seen articles and heard things about people, using AI. Very limited. I don't know very much. I don't really keep up with the news basically at all. But I do know that they are trying to apply it. But I wouldn't recommend it personally. Not that anyone cares, but personally, I wouldn't recommend it. And I would really encourage everyone here to just really think twice about using AI, because it's going to become much, much more common. I've already noticed that things like, for example, Google, it starts giving answers in AI. Every time I see it, I immediately I don't look at it. I don't even even if my mind starts reading for like a second, I try to avoid it, so that my mind is not, we're not colonizing our minds with this fake garbage, to be frank. So yeah, I very much try to avoid it to the best of my ability. So I think that we should be very careful about that. Not to be kind of anti with no reason, but I feel that there's a lot of reason to be very careful about that. And who chose, who took a vote or whatever, that we want to start having this filling our minds. I didn't get a vote. I didn't get to choose. Who chose that we could use this product? It's just been, that's the thing about these technological advancements, AI or otherwise. Who makes this happen in society? It's the companies. It's not people. It's the companies which make money and so on. So, which one of us got to vote? I want to start seeing AI and I want people to start using AI all the time. I didn't get to choose that. I didn't even have a say in it. The corporations who make, money and fight wars over this stuff, they chose it for us. So why should we go along with that? We should be very careful about reflecting on that. We should not buy into it. Oh, okay, here. It's like someone gives us something. Oh yeah, sure, okay. No, we should be inspecting. Is this a safe gift? You don't know what that is. So I think we should, as Dhamma practitioners, even if you disagree with me and you want to use AI, then at least investigate it. Don't just follow it. It's like, well, it's already here, blah, blah, blah. No. There's many things which are here which you don't use, right? For example, I bet that you didn't go to the store to buy poison today, right? Because that's not healthy. So, why would we be undiscerning and unthinking, unquestioning with these things? We need to be very, very investigative with those types of things. The consequences are dire. If we start, I already remember learning, someone was sharing with me that nowadays young children, they're not even able to read, withhold their attention span for a whole sentence or even 2 sentences or something when they're reading a book. The reading ability is very, very low now because of the quickness of social media, the quickness of online information, that people's attention span is very, very low already. Now, the work that it requires to even do an internet search and read Wikipedia, which is very low, compared to before, that is reduced drastically when you rely on AI. So just imagine how weak the mind becomes when you rely on that. The weakness of the mind is incredible. It's almost like infantilizing and making people children with the ability of their mind to discern and investigate. So we should be very careful about how we use it. If you do use it, you should be very mindful. What are you feeding your mind? How are you training your mind? We don't want to have a lazy, weak, childish mind. We want to have a strong, powerful mind, which knows, how to find what it needs to find when it wants it. So for example, if it's not the time to be bombarded with YouTube shorts or whatever, now they have those things, right? Don't watch them. Don't let them feed you what you shouldn't be. You decide what is going in your mind. Don't let other companies and greedy corporations decide what goes in there, right? Because they're not interested in your well-being. They're interested in money and power, right? So that's well known, even that's acknowledged. So we need to be very discerning. And so I would say the same, especially with AI, because AI is even more slowing down, or I should say speeding up the rate of information and the rate of bad information as well, unreliable information. So yeah, I think we should be very discerning about that. So I'm very skeptical about using it for the Dhamma. And maybe for some very limited things, it could be like things that don't imitate humans, that are just like technological. That could be possibly processing information maybe, but apart from that, even that. But I think we should be very, very discerning with that. Be very careful about that. Okay, Cal's our friend says, could Tai Chi be considered a kind of mindfulness or concentration practice? Or is it best not to think of Tai Chi in terms of Buddhist practice? Yeah, Tai Chi can be, mindfulness. You can develop, if you practice Tai Chi, you can develop mindfulness and start developing calm and so on. Of course, Tai Chi has many applications. I think in the West, people tend to relate to it more as yoga. And that's, I'd say, closer to kind of mindfulness practice, though it's also a martial art. So if you're beating people up on the street and, that would not be the best mindfulness practice. But if you are practicing mindfulness of the body and developing more awareness and calm and relaxation and letting go, then yeah, those are all good things. And I used to practice Tai Chi, as I've mentioned before. And it's definitely, I think there's a lot of benefits to Buddhist practice and a lot of relationship when it's practiced in the right context, because you develop a lot of mindfulness, but you also learn, you're learning how to use your body without tension. And it's very, very, very similar to like a meditation practice. It's like the same movement of the mind, learning how to let go, but still be awake, of like learning how to relax the mind, but still be aware and so on. It's very, very similar. I think it might be almost the same type of thing, but just applied to the body rather than just the mind. So yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits to it. Of course, it's not necessary or anything like that, but I do think that it supplements. It can be a good supplement for people who are interested, and it can develop mindfulness and so on. So yeah, there's definitely benefits of it, but I wouldn't think that it's okay if if you don't. What's most important is you can develop mindfulness even while doing the dishes, right? You don't have to be doing particularly fancy movements or anything. But Tai Chi is, it is from a meditation type of tradition. It is very meditative and so on. So I do think that it's okay. You say, is it best not to think of it in terms of Buddhist practice? I think that's totally okay. You just adapt it to Buddhism. Because remember that Tai Chi is not itself Buddhist, right? So if you want to use it for Buddhist practice, you just have to adapt it. Using it to develop your mind, using it to develop your meditation, rather than using it to develop fighting abilities or immortality or something like that. Okay, and Ryan says, I've heard that Ajahn Anan developed heart issues because of his fear of ghosts while practicing on charnel grounds. How is this possible? I asked because I might go to the ghost forest for another solo retreat, and last time it was scary. May I ask for your guidance on this issue before I embark, please? I vaguely remember something about ghosts. I remember you saying you were dreaming of ghosts, Ryan. You were saying to get away. In terms of someone developing heart issues because of fear, how is this possible? I would say, that's definitely possible. That's even just, modern Western, completely materialist type of doctors would agree with that. Fear is a physiological thing. It's not just like our mind and our body are not totally separate, right? They're integrated, they're related, and so on. And so when we have fear, your heart rate goes up, your stress and your tension and probably the adrenaline and other chemicals and so on go up, and you become unwell. You physically and mentally unwell when you're in a state of fear. So fear is not like a good thing. We don't want to be in that state. It's like anger and anxiety and depression, right? It's an unwholesome type of mental state. So if you're in it for a long time, your complexion will darken, you'll become less healthy. And so, I definitely can develop heart issues. I think that even I remember hearing from someone that, or somewhere that things like being in a constant state of stress and anxiety where your nervous system is kind of triggered, so to speak, which probably is also true of fear. It kind of ticks down. I think it was a monk, here was recently talking about this. how it kind of ticks down your heart. It really makes your heart kind of really wears on it a lot because of just the maintenance, I suppose, that's needed to maintain the body in that state. So yeah, we should be very mindful of, not dwelling in those states too much because they are bad for our mind and bad for our body, bad for everyone. So it's very possible. And then in terms of how I would recommend working with fear when you're going to the ghost forest for a solo retreat, well, you can use it, as a meditation practice. Use it. The Buddha, I would actually recommend that you read Majjhima Nikaya number 4, Sutta number 4, the Bhayabhedava Sutta. Excuse me. The Buddha talks about he was experiencing fear in the forest. So he says that he would go to, shrines and forests and spooky places, and he would practice meditation there. And before he was enlightened, and whenever he would experience fear, he said that he would not change postures until he allowed his mind to calm down. So, like for example, if you're walking meditation, you start getting fearful, don't change postures until you're able to allow the fear to go away, right? And you just remember, like, the fear is you don't have anything to fear if you protect your mind, right? If you're able to protect your mind, the more that you have a virtuous mind, the more you have a powerful, peaceful mind, the less fear you need. So if you become an arahant, you'll have zero fear, right? So every step of the path, you should have less fear. So once you start following the precepts, becoming virtuous and moral, you'll have less fear. The Buddha talks about that explicitly. As you practice sense restraint, you'll have less fear because you won't be as moved by pain. And as you practice meditation, you should have less fear. As you practice wisdom, so every step of the path, you should have less and less fear because you have less to be afraid of, right? For example, if harm comes to your body, well, if you're not as attached to your body, then you won't be as bothered. So it's like, well, if harm comes and I can't control it, well, what am I going to do? It's okay. It's okay in the sense that we don't need to be afraid, right? We just protect ourselves to the best of our ability without becoming afraid and concerned. So yeah, fear it comes from a kind of attachment. Like we don't want to lose what we love. We don't want to lose what we're attached to. But you can protect yourself without fear if you just practice understanding, like, maybe this will happen. What am I going to do if it does? Fear is not going to help. Fear will only make it worse. Fear makes it worse while we're afraid. And if what we're afraid of actually does happen, which is very unlikely most of the time, but if it does actually happen, fear will only make it worse. So without fear, you'll be better before. And if it does happen, you'll be more calm, aware, peaceful, able to protect yourself and so on during. So fear is never helpful. It's always a problem. So yeah, just practice with the fear, practice to let go of it. Don't trust it. Don't believe it. But, be careful, of course. But I wouldn't be so concerned about a ghost forest. Just send metta, send loving kindness to those beings. Develop loving kindness for beings, because ghosts, if there are ghosts there, then they're suffering. Right? Ghosts are they're not happy. So you should develop loving kindness for them, compassion. And when you develop loving kindness for them, it also will help remove your fear, because anger and fear are very related, right? When someone is angry, it's often a kind of they're not happy about what's happening, and fear is a kind of aversion to what could happen. So it's almost like a precedent to anger. Like you're afraid means that, like, you don't want it to happen. That would be bad. So it's sort of like an aversion to a future scenario. So anger is also an aversion. So fear and anger, they go very much together. And so when you have loving kindness, you'll feel protected inside of yourself. You'll feel calm. And also it will help the other beings if they are there, right? Because then you'll be kind towards them and they'll be less likely to want to hurt you. One of the benefits of loving kindness, which we chanted tonight, is amanusso piyohoti. Amanusanang piyohoti. Amanusanang piyohoti means you'll be dear, you'll be beloved to non-human beings. And also devata rakhanti, the devas will protect you. So yeah, practicing loving kindness is good for all those things. Okay, and then Ryan also says, what can we do to help our loved ones? And you say children. What can we do to help our children after we die? Is there a way to take rebirth with this purpose in mind? Yeah, good question. So common in the Buddhist tradition is that when someone else passes away in our family, it's very good to make offerings on their behalf. So you make offerings, like you offer things like food, right? Food to the monks is very common. People offer food, offer requisites and clothing, and make charitable donations, and then you dedicate, thinking, may all these offerings, all the goodness, may it be for the benefit of my ancestors, may it be for the benefit of this person. Because when someone passes away, um, if their mind is in a very attached state, then their mind will continue, can continue in that state. And if they don't have a lot of good virtue and lightness in their mind, then they might be kind of stuck in a sort of ghost state, a very state of suffering. And so when they can become uplifted, seeing people do good things, thinking of them, offering things, they can be nourished by that. And also they can rejoice, anumodana, they can rejoice in that goodness and feel that love, that metta, and develop a mind which sees the goodness of virtue and giving, and then they can create some good karma and be lifted up. So when someone passes away, it's very common, very valuable to do that. But when we pass away, how can we help people? Well, the best thing to do is, you want to, before you pass away, teach them and be a good example to them, right? Because once you're gone, you don't necessarily know. But the best thing you could do, if, I would say, is probably pass away and then, have as good of a rebirth as possible. Because if you pass away and you're born in a low state, it's not going to help them, because if anything, they'll be less likely to be able to help you, and you won't be able to influence them. But if you pass away in a good state, well, if you pass away and you're very calm in the face of death, you're very peaceful and not fearful, that will be a really powerful example. Very, very powerful. They can see that that's possible. And related to your second question, is there a way to take rebirth with this purpose in mind? There's actually an entire practice of Buddhism. The most common form of Buddhism in the world, if I'm not mistaken, is called Pure Land Buddhism. And Pure Land Buddhism is a type of Buddhism where you're practicing, it's actually very deep. It has many aspects to it, but this most surface level, you could say, is that people, they develop purity in their minds, and they develop a strong aspiration to be reborn in the presence of a Buddha, so that they can practice the Dharma. And what they do is, there's many stories, though, like there's actually collections and so on of, for example, many people in the West, they might know like Zen koans and Zen stories, right? Well, also the Pure Land tradition, there's stories, but they're not like Zen stories. What they are is they're stories of people when they passed away, and that continues to this day. So I've heard some stories of modern people, like in this time, not like thousands of years ago, where, for example, they were very dedicated Pure Land practitioners. So they had developed a lot of purity and a lot of aspiration to go to the Pure Land. And often they'll pass away with a smile in a meditation posture, and there'll be like a beautiful fragrance filling the room that people will be surprised by. And they'll be very, very peaceful, very, very calm. And often they'll predict their death. Like they'll know, oh, it's coming. And then they'll see like a vision of maybe a Buddha or a pure, very beautiful place. And they'll pass away very, very peacefully, very happily. So, and that's very inspiring, if you see that. Just imagine that. Like imagine if someone in your family, one day they told you that they're going to pass away soon, and they were very peaceful. They were okay with it. They weren't afraid, and they died in a comfortable position, smiling. And they were their body was dignified, and it was inspiring with a beautiful fragrance. So like that's very inspiring. That tells you like, wow, it's really possible to not be overwhelmed by the inevitability of death. So you don't have to practice Pure Land Buddhism for those types of benefits, but the point is that those people prepare for death. So they're basically, their whole practice, they're preparing to let go of this world so that they can then move on to a more wholesome condition. So their whole life, like they're practicing letting go, basically, like letting go into releasing and surrendering themselves to the power to a Buddha, to a good place. So it's very, not very common in the West, because most people, when they come to Buddhism, they're not looking for some, they want to meditate in a different way. They want to do like breath meditation. So you can also do that even without, you can just develop an aspiration. Like if you don't attain awakening, whatever, if you don't attain freedom from rebirth, then may you be born in the most suitable conditions for Dhamma practice. And really aspire, you can form that aspiration. And just when you are passing away, naturally, you try to allow the mind to attach as little as possible to any future state. Another sutta that I can recommend to you, Ryan, is the advice to Anathapindika in the Majjhima Nikaya. I think it's in the 100s. If you look up advice to Anathapindika, and there Venerable Sariputta is advising one of the Buddha's lay disciples as he's passing away. And Sariputta basically, step by step, tries to get his mind to let go of any inclination towards a future life. So like as he's dying, he's saying, telling him not to let his consciousness, not to let his mind be settled on anything, so that when he dies, he can let go as much as possible. So the more you let go, the more refined rebirth you'll have, right? So that's also good. If you let go a lot, you might even become a non-returner when you're dying. And then you could really, that'd be really good, because maybe you could help your family as well. So it's very good to try to let go as much as possible in that process. Just surrender to that process and allow your mind to not be afraid. Don't develop fear, but rather when it inevitably comes, then you develop clarity. Just take that as an opportunity for practice, and you prepare for that before you die. And then Manny says, can you please talk a bit on right view? So about the topic of right view. Well, let's see. I would recommend looking at some suttas and Dhamma talks on this topic specifically, just because it would require like a whole Dhamma talk to go into that. But the basics of right view, commonly it's taught in two levels, so two types. And you can find this, for example, in the Mahachattarisika Sutta, if I'm not mistaken on the title, Majjhima Nikaya. And the idea is that there is what's called Lokya Samadhi. So Samadhi, which is Lokya, means it's related to the world. It's worldly, mundane, which means it doesn't transcend the world. And then there's Lokuttara, which means it transcends, it goes beyond the world. Lokuttara Samadhi. So the mundane, the non-transcendent, right, the normal kind of worldly right view is the view that there is meaning, there is value, merit to be made in giving, in generosity, and there is the results of our good and bad intentional deeds. So someone who cultivates virtue and acts in a good way, they will experience the results of that, whether in this life or in a future life. And someone who does bad things, they'll experience the consequences of that, this life and future lives. And also it's the view that, for example, mother and father it's a little bit debated exactly the meaning of it, but that mother and father either are especially worthy of our respect and taking care of them and making offerings to them and respecting them because of the gratitude we should have towards them. And also that, mother and father, for example, in many cultures, you make offerings when they pass away, as we mentioned, also that is valid. And then it's also the view that there is, of course, the afterlife. So it's a view that it's a view in karma and rebirth. So it's not specific to Buddhism. Like any kind of view that virtue and rebirth, virtue and future lives, and upholds the value of generosity and virtue. And then finally, the last part of that, which I think is very important, which is often under appreciated or not talked about very much. The last part of it is actually someone who has the view that there are religious people, there are spiritual practitioners who have realized with their own insight those things that I just mentioned, and then declare it to other people. So it's not just like a blind view, like, for no reason, I just believe these things, or I believe it because someone told me. A part of the view is the belief that there are actually people who have verified that for themselves. They've done the practices and the experimentation to actually see that for themselves, and then they declare it. So part of the view is like, it's also possible for you to experience those things for yourself, right? So, briefly on this, I would say the way that I have introduced this in the past is, do you believe in the past? And you think, well, of course, many people, they do believe in the past, right? But what evidence do you have for that? Maybe some memories, but there's no evidence anymore that the past existed, right? But intuitively, you have an understanding that, there is a past, there is such a thing as that. Because you also know, like, well, if I didn't believe in the past, then I wouldn't think that the actions that I did before are influencing me now. But part of why we believe in a past, because we don't have any actual evidence for it, How do you know that the world didn't just pop into existence 3 seconds ago with all of your memories, everything there? It just seems like it was the past, but it's all just existed, just popped into existence just a few moments ago. Well, part of it is because we have this sense of our actions having consequences over time, right? So we tend to think like, oh, I'm in this place right now because of what I did. I walked here, I got here, I worked to get here, I did certain things, I focused my mind in certain ways. So my actions in the past, they got me here. So part of the reason that we believe in the past is also because the present is affected by it, and because of our memories of it and our experiencing of cause and effect over that dimension, right, past to present. And also, then do you believe in the future? Right? You don't know that the future is going to happen, right? There's no reason per se that the world won't just cease existing, right, at any moment. So why does it not? Where's the evidence that it won't do that? There isn't any. There's no evidence that won't happen. So we believe in the future, though, because we believe that the actions that we do now, because of our past experience and because of our experience, now, we tend to believe that, well, the actions that I do now, they actually do have consequences in the future. There is this continuity over time of cause and effect of the results that I do and the things that I experience. So even though we don't have there's no scientific evidence that the world didn't just pop into existence with all of the data 3 minutes ago, and there's no scientific evidence that the world won't cease existing 3 minutes from now, right? All we have is measurements of what we have right now, right? And so we tend to believe in those things, though, right? We tend to believe in it, and we would think that it's kind of silly not to, because it seems very obvious to us. So why is it not the case that there could be more than, why do we tend to think, well, just when I was born, that's it? It's like, well, the past exists up to 10 days ago, but before that, it all came into existence. Well, people are born with different capacities, right? With different faculties, even in the same family, same parents, and so on, even twins. So and there's other factors as well. So the point is that the past and the future, there's no reason that we should necessarily limit them like that very strongly. There's not a compelling reason, and there's actually reason to think that actually cause and effect over time is something that is experiential for us, right? We've always experienced this as far as we can remember. So it's that's part of right view, is applying that and then developing your meditation to understand it deeper. And then the other aspect where that naturally evolves is then you want to, the next aspect of right view the Buddha says is lokuttara, and that's the view of the Four Noble Truths. And that's referring to someone who has right view on a higher level. So that's referring to like a deeper level of right view. And that, I think, is a little bit too much of a topic to go into right now. But needless to say, that would be, for example, if you read the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, right, the Buddha where he teaches the Four Noble Truths for the first time, then you can see there what that's talking about. So someone who basically they'll understand suffering experientially and the cause of it, and that includes the cycle of rebirth and so on, and then they'll understand the cessation and the path. So it's a kind of understanding of how to get out of the world, what the nature of the world is, our life, and how to get out of it. So it's more like mundane right view is just like recognizing just some basic statements about the world, like that the world operates in this basic way. And then a super mundane right view is talking about understanding how to go beyond that world, how to penetrate through it, not just have the facts about it. Okay, and Mariah says she's had a flu for a few days and finds it hard to get into concentration or even want to meditate. What types of meditation would you suggest when ill? I typically do mindfulness of breathing. I would recommend mindfulness of sickness. Mindfulness of sickness is good. So when we're going through something like that, that's a really powerful time to investigate, to learn, right? To experience the sickness, experience your reactions of aversion, not liking, like, oh, I don't like this is uncomfortable, maybe even fear, or maybe kind of just, maybe you're not even averse to the sickness, but maybe you're just averse to like how you can't do things that you wish you could do, or it's wasting time, or maybe you don't like to be a burden to people. So there's many emotions that can go on when we're sick, right? Many different physical experiences, many emotional reactions. And so mindfulness of sickness is, that's a very good practice that you can do at that time. And when you practice mindfulness of sickness, you want to learn the basic idea of this is that you learn to develop an awareness of the experiences that you're having without getting wrapped up, immersed, and caught up in them, not being swept away by them, and learning to apply your effort, apply your wisdom and your discernment to allow your mind to become more peaceful amidst that difficult situation, to let go of those aversions and fears and uh, kind of desires, but to become more peaceful, like this is good enough. And also to generate a sense of goodwill and well-being and gentleness with your body, with yourself. Because meditation can also be healing. Of course, we want to be careful with this type of advice. Advising people to use meditation for healing, but actually, meditation can be used for healing as well. If we are very mindful and gentle with our body, and we develop clear awareness, which is relaxing the body, you can actually relax a lot of tension and a lot of pain, and you can relax a lot of inflammation, and you can help cure it quicker. So different practitioners have talked about that, and different people have experienced that. And so you can also, you don't want to do it with you don't want to meditate hoping to cure your illness, but rather you just do it in order to calm down the body and the mind, and it might also have those side effects. So yeah, just investigate, be mindful of the sickness. I would really recommend that. So then you don't, whether or not you want to meditate, well, you have to be aware of it, because if it's very painful and distracting, you're going to be aware of it anyway. So you might as well be aware of it in a way that makes your mind more happy, right? That's a good thing. You don't need to kind of force yourself onto the breath or onto some other thing. Just be with that experience. Allow it to be. Don't force your mind, but allow your mind to explore it and to find peace within it. That's what I would recommend. Okay. And then Kumu says, could you please give some help asking how to cultivate piti and passaddhi, which are two of the 7 bojjhangas, outside of meditation for lay people. You say, there are many lay followers who have stopped running behind materialistic goals, but in the process have lost joy in their lives. If they know how to generate joy within, that would be helpful. Yeah, that's a really good question, Kumu, and I'm sure a lot of people on the here can relate to that to some extent, right? Sometimes when you practice Buddhism, then you start to see all the drawbacks, and you don't really get caught up in all the kind of illusions, so on, of the world, but then you don't have a lot of happiness. So then it can be kind of a gray state, kind of in between. So, well, if you look at the list of the 7 bojjhangas, the Buddha, just in that list, he kind of gives an example of how it's done, right? So the 7 bojjhangas, for those who don't know, and for these words, they are sati, which is mindfulness, dhammavicya, which is investigation, virya, which is energy, piti, which is rapture, passaddhi, which is tranquility, samadhi, which is mental unification, and upekkha, which is equanimity, clear, balanced seeing. So these are sequential, right? They're not necessarily just sequential, but they are. The list is itself also sequential. So where does piti come? It comes after vidya in the list, right? And the meaning of that is that when the mind is very mindful, very interested, and in the details of what's going on, and investigating it, and it's very energetic, like it sees, if your mind sees clearly what to do, and it has a lot of mindfulness, and it's not kind of pushed and pulled by the outside impressions and so on, then you get a lot of energy to just focus on that work. It's kind of like when you are interested in a task, and you see the task, and you're investigating it, and you're like, okay, I know exactly what to do, and you're not distracted by outside things and internal emotions, then you really get in the flow, right? You really get in the zone. And as you do that, then you start to get really happy doing it. It gives you a sense of fulfillment, right? It gives you a sense of joy. But even more so, that's just a mundane example. Even more so when you're cultivating a kind of going inward, right? Rather than focusing on outside externals. So as you're moving inward, even more so. So you're learning to make the mind more buoyant and more light and more subtle. So you can develop piti in meditation in that way. But in terms of daily life, then I would say you don't necessarily need to, when you say outside of meditation, what you really want to focus on is not so much piti, but because that's a little bit of it can be kind of a strong emotion, but Rather, what you want to learn how to develop is a sense of contentment and joy, just a simple joy, more of a kind of plain joy, like a more, like a warm, more soothing one of just kind of present moment contentment, not being pushed and pulled. And that relates to passaddhi. Passaddhi is tranquility. So this is learning to relax into the present moment, right? Allowing, like often I've talked about this in the past, often our mind is inclining towards the future and it's kind of moving forward and it's restless. So you want to learn to develop a kind of mindfulness and an interest in what's happening here, learning to let go of that desire, that getting caught up and swept up by the pressures of the world, learning to allow those pressures not to uh, not to indulge in the mind, getting pulled by them, and find that sense of safety and peace in the present moment. And then when you do that, you'll find this a subtle sense of contentment, right? Like a subtle sense of joy, of like, oh, it's it's kind of nice. Even if we don't need to be bored. Actually, you can be very interested, very joyful, very light. So that's nourishing. And then as you meditate, that will help your meditation. So because you're doing the work before you get there. So then your body will relax, your mind will relax. And also the joy you can intensify it, you can strengthen it. The other thing you can do for developing joy is recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So inspire, what the Buddha calls inspiring themes, as well as loving kindness, and recollection of virtue and so on. So recollections which inspire the mind, those can develop joy more easily, especially in daily life. As you just take a few moments to reflect on, being balanced, calm, relaxed, content in the present moment, not being pushed and pulled, and then reflect on the goodness, reflect on the Buddha, on the Dhamma, on the Sangha, especially relating it to your experience, and you can develop joy from that. So those types of things, you'll start to find, oh, there is actually joy that can be found here, right? And just cultivate it, dig that well, go deep into there and start digging for that water. Okay, and Hasanta says, do we get stuck in samsara as we benefit from generosity and advancing on the path? Then we get greedy for our gains and proud. We're rich as we are better, then fall back again and again. Okay, so I think I understand what you're asking. So you're saying, like, do we get stuck in samsara because we become very generous and then we do good things, but then then because of that we create a lot of good karma, and so we start getting a lot of nice things. Then we get more greedy for those and proud, so then we start doing bad things. So yes, that is exactly a danger of samsara. There's a kind of cycle. That's part of the danger of merit, right? Of the danger of mundane good karma. So mundane good karma is, of course, good. It's important, but it's not safety. That's not ultimate safety. That just leads to temporary conditions. Actually, one of the things which is sometimes talked about for monks, which is also applies to lay people, is that as a monk, it's very important to practice well. Because let's say as a monk, you practice a lot of. If you're a good monk, you practice virtue, and you do some generosity and meditation, so you can develop a lot of merit. But if you kind of stop there, you develop a lot of merit. Maybe then you get reborn as like a very powerful, wealthy, comfortable person, and then you just fall away. You just get swept away in that. So it's wasted. Or you become a monk, then you get reborn in heaven, and you just get distracted. You just stop practicing, and then you just get swept away. It could be a long, long time. So also as a monk, like just cultivating merit is very, it's dangerous in the sense that it's not safety. It's not like it's a bad thing. Of course, it's a good thing to do merit, but it's dangerous in the sense that just stopping there will not be enough. So that applies to lay people as well. Cultivating a lot of merit, like you cultivate a lot of merit in this life, and if you kind of stop there, yeah, okay, that's nice. Yeah, you'll be happier, and you'll go to maybe be born in a nice place, but then very easily you'll just get distracted, swept away, lost, and so then you have to start all over again, and who knows how long it's going to be. So yeah, that is part of the danger of that. So that doesn't mean don't do these things, because if you didn't do them, you'd be even worse, right? If you didn't do them, you wouldn't be able to advance on the path at all, and then afterwards you'd probably be less likely to be, you wouldn't be born in a good place most likely. So definitely you have to make merit, but the point is not stopping there, right? Because merit is not enough. It's kind of like you bring a snack, and it's like, okay, that's nice, but once you've eaten the snack, then if you don't know how to cook and you don't have any other ingredients, you're going to go hungry. So there's a saying which is not exactly Buddhist, but you give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, you teach him to fish, you feed him for a life, right? So if you give someone a fish, then okay, you feed them for a day. That's good. That's not bad. But then afterwards, they're going to go hungry because they're dependent on that. But if you teach them how to fish, then they can feed themselves for life. So of course, Buddhism doesn't recommend fishing. We don't recommend killing, but you get the principle, right? So if you just do good things, you just you're just getting a fish, like you're just getting a good meal for the future, but that's about it. But if you develop the path to an advanced level, then you'll be good for the rest of your time in samsara. You'll be safe. So you'll be fed for life, in the sense of your samsara. So yeah, it's important not to contemplate the dangers of that. So contemplating the dangers of, first we start by developing virtue, and then we start by contemplating the dangers of just that virtue and not settling for that. And the Buddha talks about that. Mariah has a question, which is very, very monastic of you. Since juice is okay to drink after noon when keeping it precepts, are popsicles also allowed? So, as monastics, there's many, what do you call it? Like the rules for what's allowable, they're very, in a sense, they're kind of complicated because there's so much, it varies so much and blah, blah, blah. So these types of questions very easily come up, right? Like, is this allowable? Is that allowable? What about this? What about that? So are popsicles allowed? Then if it's made of juice, then, technically it's just frozen juice, right? So what really is the most important is checking your intentions. Like, for example, you mentioned you're sick. So maybe a popsicle would be a way of, maybe it's helpful for, like, if you're having soreness and so on. So it might be helpful, if it's helpful and you're going to be drinking the juice anyway, then yeah. If you're eating popsicles just for the sake of, for the fun, tasty popsicles, I would say it's a detriment to practice. It might be better just to drink the juice, right? Because then it's less intoxicating on the mind. So generally speaking, if it's popsicles are generally speaking considered allowable by Vinaya standards because they are juice which has been frozen, kind of like how ice is allowable, right? We can have ice because it's just water which is frozen. So generally speaking, if it's just a liquid in a frozen state, it's considered allowable. But of course, we want to look at the intentions and make sure that we are not, as they say in Burma, if you know the precepts very well, you can kill a chicken. Meaning, like, if you really know all the rules, then you might just be able to find a way around them. So you want to make sure that you're using it, of course, in a wise way. Because we don't follow the precepts in order to follow like a particular rule. We follow the rules in order to understand the principle behind the rules, right? So yeah, just check your intentions. But popsicles are usually they're considered allowable. So yeah, assuming it's not like it doesn't have other things in it. Okay, and then we have a lot of questions today. Hasanta says, in the formless realms, he says, you understand that beings are not conscious, thinking, or generating new karma. Do they just stay till the karma propelling them there is expended? And there's a follow-up. Okay. So I wouldn't say that they're not conscious. That would be a little bit of a wrong way of thinking about it. They are conscious. They're just not, as you say, thinking. That's probably true, right? They're probably not thinking in the sense of like verbal thoughts, right? Because their mind is absorbed in a state of samadhi. I am not sure. I don't know if they can think. It's possible that they can actually. Like it's possible that they're not always in that state, but that they can also move their mind around a little bit more. Like for example, the Brahma realms, which they're supposed to correspond to the jhanas. So sometimes you'll see like Mahabrahma in the suttas, he's represented as, talking and moving about, but in the suttas it also says that when someone's in jhana, they can't speak, right? So sometimes it's not certain if they are always in that state or if they can sometimes be in slightly more mobile states of mind, but that's their kind of base state. I don't know. But I would say definitely the general trend would be most likely they're just always absorbed in that, right? They're just absorbed in that state of samadhi. So do they just stay till the karma propelling them there is expended? Yes, that's exactly it. So they're experiencing the results of their karma. So they were there for a long time in the Buddhist tradition, it's said. So they're there for a long time. Kind of like if you throw a ball up into space, you think, oh, it won't fall. But actually gravity still operates in space. Eventually, if something's in the atmosphere, it rotates for a long time and eventually it will go down. If it's, depending on how high it is. So it's kind of like that. It's like if you throw something just a little bit, it'll only take a little bit for it to fall down. If you throw it very high, it'll take a while for it to fall down. If you throw it all the way to the atmosphere, it might take a long time. It'll rotate and rotate and rotate and rotate, and eventually it will, though, fall down. So it's kind of like that. So they do create very powerful karma, which brings them into a very powerful, stable state of mind. But eventually they do pass away from there if they don't attain enlightenment. So yeah, it's kind of like running on savings, so to speak. Does that mean our lives here have a karmic propulsion quantum, you say? If you know what I mean? I don't know what you mean by quantum. Say like a predetermined lifespan. In terms of do our lives have a quantum, do they have a karmic propulsion? Yeah, generally speaking, that's how it's understood. For example, it's not possible for humans to live over a certain time because the karma of being a human being, humans have a particular lifespan. Like it's not possible for most humans to live for 800 years. But in the heavens, for example, the deities are said to have particularly fixed lifespans. Like as you go up, their lifespan increases. So humans is a little bit flexible, but there is definitely a range, and that is propelled. And also, some people, they might be born with karma of having a shorter lifespan, or karma of having a longer lifespan, karma of having good health or worse health. So things like lifespan are also affected by karma, right? When people give, there's a famous verse, Abhivadana silisa nichang buddhapitaino chataro dhamma vadhanti ayuvanno sukham bala. So that means that one who is always revering and honoring virtuous elders, then they grow in 4 qualities. One of them is ayu. Ayu means long life, right? Like if you know Ayurveda is the science of longevity. So yeah, what long life? So you create the karma of having a longer lifespan. So that means that yes, there is a certain degree there of you could say like determinacy of the lifespan. Is it necessarily 100% fixed as a human? I don't know. I don't know if that's really the case. It's possible that we can change it after. But the other realms of existence, often it is said to be fixed. Like many Deva realms, it is said to be like a fixed time span. So for humans, I'm not sure if it's 100% fixed individually or if it's, I don't really know how, to that level. It's not talked about in the suttas. And so I don't really have much of a basis of tradition to say for that. Mariah says, when I read the rebuke to Mara, I was astounded by all of the supernatural elements in the sutta. I doubted a lot of what I read. Can skepticism around these things hinder one's progress on the path? Yeah, another good question. You don't need to believe everything in the suttas to attain awakening, right? For example, what if you just never read that sutta, but you attained awakening? Like, it's not necessary to believe that information, right? So the Buddha famously says, don't rely on scripture. And just because it's in scripture, believe it's true. Just because someone tells you, don't rely on just that enough. Just because a teacher who you respect says it, don't believe that's enough to know it's true. Just because it's tradition, that's not enough. So just because it's in the suttas doesn't mean it's true. That's not enough. So it's okay to have doubts. It can hinder your progress if you start doubting the path in general. Then that can hinder your progress because then like I mentioned before, if you don't have faith in the practice, you won't do it. You'll become less. You become more confused and less energetic. But you don't need to believe everything. And the other thing I would say is don't think that these need to be read literally in the sense that we often take it. Notice that, the suttas never say this must be taken 100% literally as a historical account. Often these things are allegorical, or there's a lot of value to be found in the allegory. And if you look at the story, you will notice there is a lot of it is very allegorical. Like there are symbols at play, and it's not like in ancient times they weren't aware of that, right? So I would recommend seeing what can you get out of the story, just setting aside what you think is historical or ahistorical, but looking at what is the story trying to say. That's where you find the Dhamma, right? Because whether or not, like for example, historical facts, they're mostly irrelevant, right? Like whether the Buddha was born on this day or that day, it doesn't matter, right? What matters is the Dhamma that you can find, the value that you can extract and put into practice and be inspired by. So the story has value, whether or not it happened in history. So just look at it from that lens. If you read the suttas like that, you can really never go wrong, because whether or not it happened, it's irrelevant, right? What matters is it telling you something that's useful? Is it helping you find freedom from suffering? And maybe at this time it's not, but don't then dismiss it, because maybe it does actually have things to help. But at this time, it's not the right thing for you, right? So remember that these were composed and told in a very different setting, very different audience. So we just want to remember, like, maybe these are not, we can't relate to them now, but other people, other settings, they might be relatable. So we can't just dismiss it 100%, right? So it can be a hindrance if you get caught up in that kind of attitude, like of sort of rejecting and not finding value and becoming doubtful and not practicing. But just, doubting the historical reality of a sutta is totally fine. And that's, very normal. And it's not, you don't have to believe it was historical. That's not necessary. There's no creed like that in Buddhism. Like you don't have to believe, oh, this sutta is historically, as we say, inerrant, right? Meaning there's nothing wrong in it. It's 100% true as it's written historically, etc. Okay. And then we have a question from Joe. Just says, warmest wishes, Bante. Warm wishes to you, Joe. Hope you're doing well. Says, please help me understand the difference between bhutang, sankatang, cetitang, and paticca samuppannang using concrete visual examples like a glass of water, please. Great. Okay. So then you had, you were quoting a sutta it's called the King Diptika Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. And to quote it here for those, it says, it's Anathapindika, one of the Buddha's lay disciples, is talking to people. And he tells them that his view, they're talking about their views, and he says, Venerable Sirs, whatever exists, whatever is conditioned, volitionally constructed, and dependently risen, that is impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering is not mine, I'm not that, and that's not myself. That's his view. So, Yanko Bhante Kinchi Bhutang Sankatang Chetitang Paticca Samuppannang Tadanicang. Okay, so he's describing the basic Buddhist view. We actually talked about before, what is right view. He's here talking about what we would call transcendent right view. So he's talking about describing what is the content of the view, which is transcendent, meaning it moves beyond the world. So whatever is bhuta, sankata, cetita, and paticca samuppanna, that's impermanent. And whatever is impermanent, basically you should let go of it. That's the content of this. So what is the difference between these things? Well, one thing to note is you don't need to get caught up too much in the differences, because they're actually mostly referring to kind of synonymous aspects of the same thing. So there are subtleties, there are differences between them, but the general idea is a consistent image, right? So it's not like he's saying that there's one, two, three, four. There's nothing. They're saying that there's four completely separate things, but they're all aspects of one reality. So they're describing one thing from different angles. So kind of like if you were to, you said a glass of water, right? So just using that exactly thing. If you were to look at this glass, right? If you look at it from this angle, it looks one way. But if you look at it from this angle, it looks another way. And this angle, it looks another way. But actually, it's one glass. It's one thing, right? So we talked about this before with the simile of the elephant. So these are talking about he's saying that he's looking at things, and when he sees it, he can draw out different aspects of the same type of thing. So bhuta means it's come to be. It means it's come to exist. So whatever has come to exist, like actually plants are actually called bhuta in Pali. So for example, when a plant sprouts out of the ground, you have a bud and it turns into a flower, and then a flower can turn into fruit, right? So it comes into existence. It's like, where was the fruit? Was it in the seed? And you look at an apple seed and you're thinking, wow, how does that apple fit in there? I need to learn those folding skills. I can use that for my wardrobe, right? So no, it doesn't fit inside there. It's not like folded up inside the seed, but rather the apple comes to exist. When the conditions are right, the apple appears, it comes into existence. So it means it pops into existence. It comes into existence. That's bhutang. It's originated. It's come into existence. Sankatang means that it has two meanings, but it means often translated as conditioned. But it's also a synonym here of the next word, chetitang. So sankatang and chetitang. So sankata comes from the root kar, which means to do or to make. And kata means made. Sankata also means made, but it means made in the sense of prepared, put together. So it's conditioned in the sense that it's been constructed. The word constructed is a very good word because it gives us that sense of like it's been put together, right? So constructed, I would say, is a good translation of that in this context. Constructed or created. So created by what? Constructed by what? Constructed and created through, as the next word says, chetitang means by intention. So it's conditioned through intention. It's created by intention. So it's been willed into existence, basically. And you might think, well, that seems strange, right? I didn't will my body into existence. Actually, you did. You did will it into existence from a particular perspective, right? It wasn't just that. It's not like just our will alone can created this body, but the will was one of the factors which created it. So think about when you're making a work of art, right? You can't just, if you have in your mind a picture and you have the will, the desire to create the picture doesn't pop into existence, right? Just that alone, just the will in your mind alone is not enough to create a picture or to create a pot, right? If you're imagining creating a pot, just the will alone is not enough. However, an artist must have that. If you don't have the will, if you don't have in your mind the shape, the form of what you're going to make and the will to create it, you won't actually create it. So if I give you a ball of clay and I say, okay, make a pot, and you don't have the will, the intention, the desire, you don't apply yourself to make the pot, your mind doesn't know what a pot is, you can't actually make one. So our body, our existence is like that. So, our will alone isn't enough, but it's definitely a necessary factor. That's our karma. So the karma that we do, the intentional activities we do, they are actually like creating, they create reality, literally speaking, but they're not just creating reality. There's other factors as well that must be there. Like, for example, parents, right? Food. So there's other factors. So sankata means it's been constructed in part by what we've done, by our actions, chetitang by our intention. So just like with intention, you might create a work of art. With your actions, you might put together a house. So with our intentions, we allow things to come into existence. We create things. We construct conditioned things. So an apple, a flower, they come into existence without volition, right? But human beings, right? Existent beings like people, animals, we come into existence. One of the factors is our karma. It's our actions. It's our intentions. And so we've come into existence, right? You've come into this life. You look around you. There's a whole experience, a whole life. And this life has been put together, constructed like a work of art or like a pot, like a house. It's been constructed with our intention, with our mind, like an artist or a builder, a carpenter creating something. So that was our past intentions, our past karma. So that's the sankata. It's been put together, and chetitang is referring especially to those intentions that we have. And then finally, paticca samupannang. That means that it has arisen dependently. So it's arisen dependent, meaning it's arisen dependent on all these factors, right? So bhutang is very general. It means it just come into existence. Sankatang and chetitang, it's been constructed and created through willed. It's been constructed and willed into being. those are talking a little bit about some of the conditions. So it's come into existence partially through being made, being constructed, and willed with our intentions. And then paticca samuppanna is the most broad that collects all of them. So it's saying that it's arisen because dependently on something, dependently on things, partially our intentions, partially external factors, and partially nutriments and so on. So it's capturing all the conditions together. So just like, remember the pot imagery. So you might say, okay, I made this pot, I willed this pot, I created this pot with my intention, I constructed this pot. But also you can say, well, this pot has arisen dependently, right? A clay pot. Dependently on what? Partially on my volition, partially on the clay, partially on the tools that I used, partially on my teachers who taught me, partially on all these other factors, right? So there's many, many conditions which allowed you to make that pot, to create that work of art. The intentions and the activities are only part of the conditions. So that's what this means. Things which have come into existence, like a pot, which have been constructed and created, like a pot, and which are arisen dependently on things, like a pot. So those are the different aspects of those words. And so what he's applying that to is specifically, life, like everything that we experience, all of our life, like our body, our mind, our, the world we experience, all of that is conditioned. You only experience it with certain conditions. So you're experiencing, well, it's all come into being, right? It's here. You're here now. And it has been created and constructed with will through our karma, and it's dependently arisen. So there's certain conditions like having sense faculties, the external objects, the light, the attention, the karma, the lifespan, our parents, so many, many conditions which allow this to continue happening, and our craving. So that's the meaning of those 4 words. And Rick just has a comment, says, wow, the time has really flown. The question about cultivating and strengthening faith comes from years of experience in the power, bear the fruits of joy, energy, and sadhu, Rick. So thank you for your reflections. And it looks like we will not have time to get through all the questions, but we can do a kind of lightning round. So Julie is saying, if someone has disrobed, are those people allowed to wear parts of their robes in alms bowl? No, you're not really supposed to do that. If someone has disrobed, they're not supposed to use those things. There's not like a rule about it because the rules only apply to monks, right? The Buddha didn't, there's not like a precept for lay people about not wearing their robes, but it's understood that that's not a good thing. Like in Burma, for example, if you impersonate a monk, they actually put you in jail. So in Buddhist culture, it's understood to be very serious. If you're faking being a monk, then it's really bad. And the Buddha also actually elsewhere, he does talk about people who pretend to be celibate practitioners, but they aren't, then it's really, really bad karma. So the point is that it's not good to pretend to be a monk at all. And definitely you just wouldn't want to use those things because it is confusing, as you're saying. You said you found it confusing. It can inspire the opposite of faith. So we want to avoid that. But so it's not like it's not allowed because how would you can't really stop people from doing that, but it's not encouraged at all. And then Sud says, did Buddha ever talk about using mantra meditation to calm the mind? And can one enter jhana, etc.? Did the Buddha talk about mantra meditation? So the Buddha did talk about types of meditation which involve reflection. So for example, Buddhanusati, recollection of the Buddha, Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati. And the way that he described that is he gave, Itipiso Bhagavad, the list of qualities. And in the tradition, one of the ways that that's cultivated is by just focusing on one quality. Like if you just focus on arahang, 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 the quality of the Buddha being an arahant, or you focus on buddho, 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 the quality of the Buddha being awake. So in that sense, in the tradition, based off of the suttas, you can extrapolate that. The Buddha also talked about, for example, mindfulness of a particular theme, like mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the mindfulness of the devas, other kinds. So anyway, different types of mindfulness. And mindfulness is the recollection of a particular theme. So a mantra can be one way to recollect a particular theme. In the suttas, what matters most is the qualities that you're developing and the qualities that those are leading to. So yes, mantra meditation is effective. It can be used, and many masters have used it in many different Buddhist traditions and also non-Buddhist traditions. And so yes, I would recommend you can use, if you're saying, recollecting calm to motivate calmness. Yes, that is a form of mindfulness. You're recollecting the theme of calm. That would be, that is, you're just using the mantra as a way to recollect the theme. So yes, or to collect your mindfulness. So mantra meditation is good. And if you develop it really fully, you can use it as a step to jhana. Okay, and it looks like we're probably out of time. Let's see if see some nice comments. Joe giving comment advice that he's experienced. And yeah, it looks like there's just too many questions to get through them all. So so I think at this time we'll have to close. I apologize for that, just because there's a lot of questions and they're relatively lengthy and also they require attention to answer them well. So I think that to do them justice, maybe for those of you who didn't have your questions answered, then you can leave those in the future monk chat if you'd like, and then whoever is doing that, they can address those at that time. So that way that if you put them in advance, then they'll be the first to be answered. So at this time we can go ahead and close. We will say just sadhu 3 times to rejoice in all the goodness of you who have been listening in this Dhamma activity. So we can say sadhu 3 times. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I hope that you have a wonderful night, good practice, and that we'll see you here at the monastery or on our future live streams. So may you be well, happy, and peaceful.